Hi, my name is Glenn Murphy. I am one of two presenters of this video series on how to market and harvest your woodlot for profit. My co-presenter is Dr. Reen Visser from the University of Canterbury. In video 9, Reen will introduce you to the common types of harvesting and transport systems used in New Zealand, and then briefly comment on some systems that may be suited specifically for harvesting of woodlots.
When we're discussing harvesting systems or starting to look at what sort of a harvesting system might be most appropriate for a woodlot, there's a few things that you could or should keep in mind. First of all, harvesting systems are really expensive to operate. On the slide there, you will see some average figures. So an average ground-based operation might be costing $27 per tonne in New Zealand. Currently in 2020, an average cable logging operation is about $42 a tonne. Now these costs do vary considerably and they can be a little bit higher, especially for smaller woodlots, or also more complex woodlots, ones that are perhaps more difficult to access, ones that have more edge trees, and or ones that perhaps have more damage such as wind throw in them. But what you're looking at is anywhere from $15,000 per hectare in harvesting costs all the way up to well over $25,000 per hectare for a cable logging type operation. The other thing to remember is that harvesting systems tend to be very complex. So when one turns up, don't be surprised. I mean, a small one might have only 3 machines, but a larger one can have anywhere up to 10 machines. The crew that comes with that machinery can be anywhere from 4 up to 12 people. The reason why they're often large and complex is that within the New Zealand environment, we're trying to cut a large number of log rates to maximize the value of the resource that we're harvesting. So that is the key thing to remember here, is that the harvesting system is providing a service to your woodlot. It's providing that conversion from the standing trees into those saleable logs. That is the service they provide, and they need to be managed carefully to keep that value up, to keep that conversion value up, and that's where the Watts model that's presented within the scope of this woodlot series can be very helpful in terms of looking at that total value relative to the cost. And so what we're also, of course, trying to do is select a harvest system that will keep our costs down, all the while keeping in mind that, of course, safety and looking after the environment are really key components of managing a harvesting system. So the clear message here is harvesting should be done by a professional harvesting crew, and this particular session here is very much to help you understand harvesting system, not for you to be a logger. So we can actually break down our harvesting system into a number of basic steps. First of all, of course, we need to cut the tree down, the felling. There can be some processing at the stump. And then, of course, that common element there, the trees need to be pulled from the forest to a processing area, what we typically call a landing, but it can also be roadside for the trees to be processed. Once they're processed into the logs, they're of course loaded out and put onto trucks. Just for your information, harvesting systems tend to be named after the third step in this process. So we're typically referring to a ground-based operation or a cable logging operation, depending on the type of system that is extracting the timber. Just stepping through those individual elements of that harvesting chain. So the easiest or the lowest cost, simplest way of cutting a tree down is still just running out there with a chainsaw. We refer to that as a motor manual system. However, motor manual systems are of course quite difficult. It's very hard work, but also we have moved towards a more mechanized harvesting operation to both increase the productivity of the system overall, but also to really improve the safety. So top right there, or on the right, you'll see a machine felling a tree, and that is the preferred option. However, for your woodlot in a smaller setting, chainsaw felling might still be the most viable option for the harvester crew that's engaged there. When we're felling the tree, there's actually two options there, especially when we're felling it in a mechanized manner. What we most typically have in New Zealand, it's called tree length. So the felling machine really is just cutting the tree, and it may take some of the limbs off. It may also cut off the top of the tree. But in what we call a cut to length system, the felling machine not only cuts the tree down, but will also cut it into logs and leave the logs in the forest ready to be picked up. So that's a cut to length system. When we look at our extraction options, the skidder is still the most common ground-based option we have out there. More than 60% of our ground-based operations will use a skidder. A skidder can be wheeled, it can also be a tracked type skidder, but the skidder is really referring to skidding those stems, primarily tree length material, out of the forest to that processing area. What's typically coupled with a cut to length felling system is a forwarder. So the forwarder is a machine, as shown on the top right, that literally goes through that harvested area and picks up the logs and takes those out to the roadside or the landing for either further processing, but typically they will simply be picked up at a truck at that point in time. If you've got steeper terrain, then the cable yarder, cable hauler will come into question. You see one pictured here on your bottom left. Those are the ones that are simply a lot more expensive because they're more complex, but they are often required on steeper terrain if it is not safe or physically viable to operate a ground-based machine on that steeper terrain. In really exceptional circumstances, we might need to use a helicopter that will typically only be used on higher value stands where you've got very limited access opportunities, where you basically need to pick the trees up and fly them all the way out to a landing because you cannot reach them in any other way. What we can also say about harvesting systems is we've mentioned that they're complex, and there's always new innovations coming out to make it more efficient, more safe, and have a lower impact on the environment. Look, Winch Assist is something that's been developed quite extensively here in New Zealand, and it is allowing us to manage a lot more of our woodlots without having to use a cable yarder, or simply to be able to mechanize the felling and processing on the slope without needing people to be out there with chainsaws. So Winch Assist is a tool that is now commonly available, and it simply allows us to operate more safely and more cost effectively on our steep slopes. With regard to processing, there's only about 10% or just under 10% of our operations in New Zealand now use a chainsaw. So you see the gentleman up on the top left there, he's basically bucking up the stems into the desired log products. The most common now though is where we use an excavator with what is called a processing head. Those processing heads are very powerful. They will delimb the tree, they will top the tree, but they also have a computerized processing power that helps the operator optimize the value of the stem by providing it with information such as the diameter and the length of the log that it's working with. Okay, so most important in this processing part is that value recovery, making sure that the stems or the trees are actually being converted into the highest value log sorts. That is the product that you are selling. In terms of loading out, there's front-end loaders, there's excavators, loaders with grapple. A front-end loader is a nice efficient way to load a log truck, but you need a larger landing. So they're pretty rare in a woodlot type operation. So the excavator with a grapple is more common, but something else, if you have your felling and your processing done, and then you are waiting on trucks to come, self-loading. So there's truck options that have got their own grapple and can load themselves. And that means that there's potentially a nice disconnect between the harvesting operation and the trucking operation. So that's an option there as well. Transportation, 95% of all log transport in New Zealand is done by truck. Of course, rail if you're close to a railhead, or if you're, for example, in the Marlborough Sounds, using a barge may be another option that you need to use. But obviously loading out on trucks is that critical element, is that in terms of moving our finished product to market, but landings are a big and busy place. So one of the things that you can consider for a woodlot, especially if you're trying to minimize the overall size or impact that that landing has within the space of your farm, is to actually create a smaller landing and then use an off-road type truck like the one you see in the bottom right, and simply extract the logs from the landing to a more convenient place, for example, the public roadside on your farm, for them to be picked up there. Okay, so if we are having a landing in our forest, we need to make it accessible to on-road trucks. They're fairly large, so you need a very professionally built road and a larger landing. The alternative there is to go towards an off-road trucking system that will take the logs from your forest to a place where the on-road log trucks can access them and take them to market. Finally, just comment on woodlot specific systems. So most of the lower cost harvesting systems are simply very, very large harvesting systems, lots of machines, lots of equipment, and there's a lot of cost associated with bringing that to your forest in the first place. So you may have the opportunity to work with a smaller harvest system. The reason why they may be advantageous for a woodlot is that reduced equipment transportation cost, and also there simply isn't the same production pressure on keeping a larger system working. So with just one or two machines on site, especially if you've got an excavator that can cut, that can process, that can shovel, you might just have a few machines on site, and that may be a preferred way to go that matches your management of the farm or the woodlot that you're working with. So you can see there a picture on the right. These sorts of machines are available, very specialized. The Harwooder is a machine for a woodlot that can both fell and process and transport the logs from the forest. So it's an all-in-one machine. Those simply aren't so common in New Zealand, more working with excavators to extract the timber from our forest. So that's really just a small snapshot of harvesting systems, some of the options that we have, and some of those key focus areas. Critical thing to remember is engage with a professional, but also get that sense to make sure that the harvesting system that they're intending to use is the right one for the woodlot that you are looking to harvest.
This concludes video 9. In videos 10 and 11, we will look at things you can do to improve the profitability that comes from the harvesting of your woodlot. If you have any questions, please direct these to the email link shown below.